Today we're going to talk about Chapter 10 in The Power of Critical Thinking by Lewis Vaughn on the 7th edition. And I'm going to talk to you about Inference to the Best Explanation, ITTE. It be. We've talked about inference before. It's one of our big words already on the test and such, but there's a little bit of a expansion here. So don't use this one on the test, but when we're using inference, we reason from premises about a state of affairs to an explanation for that state of affairs. And so we have the idea, that there are certain things that we can figure out because we observe a great deal of it, and then this other thing over here happens. Wow, that's new. So be careful. Again, we know that inference is also inductive, and so we're going to be looking at probabilities. This is probably the best cause. This is probably the best explanation. And so we're going to try to get from one point to the other. Remember, the last time we talked, and I have to get back to my notes so I can say it to you correctly, but we know that inductive reasoning gives us most of what we know about the empirical workings of the world, allowing us in science and in ordinary experience to soar reliably from what we know to what we don't. It's that soar reliably. We have to have enough information and enough background in that particular topic or that particular subject to make sense of what we're getting. And this is about everyday stuff, why my car won't start this morning, or it's about very important, huge things like, okay, how do we get here? Why are we here? What's the meaning of life besides 42? And all of that. Okay, so we're trying to do big things here as well as little things. And so I'm going to kind of walk through what we have here and see what we do. When we're looking at explanations and inference, we're looking at this idea of a theoretical explanation. We think this is correct, and we've done a lot of work, and everything we've done points that this is correct. Okay, this is probably the best explanation. Doesn't mean that with more information, with new possibilities, that we won't have to revise that a bit. Sometimes we have to chuck it all and try again. And this is part of why folks have been so frustrated with the information we've been given about COVID-19. It's not that our scientific community, our CDC people don't know what's going on. It's that they're learning about this brand new disease as it's unfolding in the world. And so they have to revise things. We would not want them to sit back and say, okay, day 2, here's what we know. Bye-bye, right? We want them to learn more and know more so we can have better vaccines, better ways of testing, better, and that's how we do it in science. It's best explanation. Okay, we learned these 5 things. Here's a better explanation. And we learned these 5 things. And here's an even better explanation. And it happens that way all the time. It's just that with COVID, it's kind of playing out on the world stage. And every time they learn something new, we want them to update. But we would like for them to know it all at the beginning, and that's just not possible all the time. So a theoretical explanation, those are explanations that are theories or hypotheses that try to explain why something is the way it is, why something is the case, or why something happened. And we do this all the time, okay? We have all kinds of issues that we need to figure out, okay? So why did this particular program crash? Can I figure it out? I mean, I'm pretty smart. I've been using computers a long time. Or do I need an expert? Okay. Thankfully for me, I have built-in tech support. My husband's a tech guy, so it's all good. When we're looking for the best explanation, this is that inference to the best explanation. It has this pattern. This is the argument pattern. Okay, there's this thing that happened. We call it phenomenon Q. E, this explanation, provides the best explanation for Q. Therefore, it is probable that E is true. And so this explanation, we get to it in lots of different ways, okay? Sometimes we have a eureka moment and, oh my goodness, why didn't I know this before? Everything finally kind of clicked together. We had enough information in our heads. There it goes. It doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes we have to muscle through. Sometimes we have to work trial and error. And a lot of what we do in life is trial and error, right? As a little kid, I really, really, really wanted to be a nurse, okay? I was a sick kid, okay? I was in the hospital a lot. Pneumonia, heart issues, I had rag fever, whatever. And so I wanted to be a nurse. And so when I started my undergrad work, I started out as a nursing major. And then I got diagnosed with lupus and decided that probably spending my life around sick people was probably not a good idea. And everybody around me was like, well, go teach. You're good at that. Like, oh, okay. I love English. I love reading. I love writing. I love talking about books. I love talking about writing. Along the way, I got a little more influenced by philosophy and literature and lots of other things. And so here I am. But I had to revise my idea because it wouldn't fit. Okay? It wasn't that it was wrong, in the giant ethical sense. It's just that it wouldn't be the best fit for me. And a lot of you will do the same thing. You'll change your mind. What we have in our hearts and what we have in our heads when we're little, or even, when we first start out in college, we don't know all the possibilities. And sometimes we find a possibility that's better. And that's okay. Now, so we have to find this theory, right? E. The best theory is the eligible theory that meets the criteria of adequacy better than any of its competitors, okay? And so you've got this idea here, best already implies that there are multiple theories about any given situation. If there's just one, there's no best or least. There's just one. So best theory is the eligible theory. Well, how do you get to be an eligible theory? An eligible theory is one that is internally and externally consistent. And if you look at the top of, I have to go a little bit further than I wanted to, probably. The top of page 368, internal consistency is a theory that is internally consistent, is free of contradictions. I don't say we can do X in one place and then we can't do X in another place. External consistency. And this is very important because a lot of times this is what messes us up. A theory that is externally consistent is consistent with the data it's supposed to explain. We may have a perfectly good theory. It doesn't explain what we want it to explain. Put that one over on the shelf. Try again. Okay. Back at the beginning of this chapter, before we get to the explanations and inference, I want you to make sure that you have this look back at the basics. All of these are big words. So here's another go at those. Explanations and inference. We have the reminder of causal, analogical, that kind of stuff. Now, on page 360, this idea of the lore of explanation. These are different kinds of explanations that we use all the time, and we don't necessarily have to have a name for them to use them, but it's kind of nice to have them explained this way. Teleological explanations try to explain the purpose of something, how it functions or how it fits into a plan. And telos is the Greek word for end or purpose. So why do we have light switches? Well, so that we don't have to go around to every single light and turn it on manually, right? It's one thing. Teleological, why does it function? Interpretive explanations concern the meaning of terms or states of affairs. These explanations seek to understand not something's purpose or cause, but rather its sense or semantic meaning. Okay, this is dictionary stuff, right? When Mary smiled, she was signaling her agreement. Okay, so she didn't say anything out loud, but we know from past that when she smiles, she's in agreement. And that's how we interpret her smile. Procedural explanations try to explain how something is done or how an action is carried out. So basically, this is the recipe, right? A procedural explanation is like a recipe. Okay, so first you do this, second you do this. Okay, and if you do them in the wrong order, you might not get the same, fluffy cake that you're looking for. Okay. We have on page 362 a little box about Charles Darwin, and before you get all bent out of shape about, evolution by natural selection, outside of faith, okay, it is the best, natural selection is the best explanation for a wide variety of natural phenomena, okay? Now, me personally, I take as a tenet of my faith that God created the world, okay? Now, although we get a 7-day plan in Genesis, we don't get itty-bitty details, right? So, and we know by observation in the here and now that some species do adapt themselves to fit their environment. If we took that and made it big, then it makes total sense that evolution works. I would say microevolution works. Macroevolution, I'm not so much. But anyway, Darwin and the best explanation. And then we have Sherlock Holmes. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote this character, and there are lots and lots and lots of iterations of him. But the big deal here is he takes very particular, specific details and puts them together to find out the best explanation better than pretty much anybody does. Better than everybody. And that's kind of where he comes on. Okay. Chapter 10 also moves puts the exercises in throughout. And so the first set of exercises are on 364 to 367, 10.1 through 10.5. Then we get the theories and consistency. I kind of got ahead of myself there a little bit. Okay, back to this. The best theory is the eligible theory that meets the criteria of adequacy better than any of its competitors. So in order to be even an eligible theory, it has to be internally consistent, which means it doesn't contradict itself, and externally consistent, which means it actually explains the phenomenon we want it to explain. Okay. And I know you go, well, duh, why wouldn't it do that? A lot of times we get involved in what we're doing and we have this great explanation, and then we realize, but it doesn't have anything to do with this thing over here we were trying to explain. Okay. Sometimes the rabbit trail is the explanation, but not always. Okay, so if we have competing theories, okay, and we need to decide on one, we have to have some way of evaluating them, okay? Now, the short answer is, well, just weigh the evidence. Well, yeah, and if you have to go through and weigh the evidence for every single theory that pops up, it's going to be a while, right? So we're trying to get to a way of looking at criteria, and we want that criteria to be as streamlined as possible, but also comprehensive enough that we actually get a good answer, okay? And that's going to be over here. Okay, criteria of adequacy, this is page 371, I think is the review notes. We have 5 criteria that we're going to weigh our competing theories against, okay? And so one of the best ways to determine which one of your theories works is, are they testable? Can we do a test that explains or gives us an answer that this particular theory is correct? Okay, we can't always. Okay, can we recreate the Big Bang? I hope not. Sounds very dangerous to me. But there are other things that we can do. Fruitfulness. If I have this particular theory, okay, let me shift over a little bit, something that's a little less controversial. Germ theory, okay? Why do we get sick? Well, there are these itty-bitty, naked, we can't see them with our naked eyes, right? Or glassed eyes even. And they float through the air, and if we breathe them in, we're going to get sick, okay? So germ theory says there are these microscopic organisms that if we ingest them in some way, breathe them, eat them, they touch us, whatever, then we're going to get sick. Okay, we can't see them, but we know they're there. Okay, so if I'm going to say, okay, do I have a way of determining the truth of this? Well, these days, yes, of course, we have amazing microscopes, and we can look at things and see how they react to different, bodily fluids or tissue or whatever, and say, well, yeah, that one's doing what I think it's doing, so there we go. Now, can that germ theory tell us new things? Well, yeah, it tells us things that, hey, there are microbes in our digestive tract that keep us healthy. The biggest part of our immune system is in our gut. Well, okay, now we know that the reason that works is all these little microbes are in there, and if enough of the bad ones get in there, we're sick. If we can overcome the bad ones with good ones, then we get better. Okay, we stay better. Okay, so yes, we have other things that are microbial that we can find. Scope. Can it explain other phenomena? How many things, how many different phenomena can germ theory cover? Well, if we want to count diseases individually, that's a huge number, right? If we want to count, okay, bacteria versus viruses, two totally different mechanisms there, right? What works to kill one, antibiotics, can kill bacteria. And part of that problem is they kill all the bacteria, and you need some of that good stuff. That's part of that novel concept. Can it talk about other things? Yes. Okay, simplicity. And simplicity wants the least number of new assumptions that we have to make in order for us to buy this particular theory. Okay. So far, germ theory tells me why I get sick, how to get better, and how my body works to keep me healthy. Okay, so far we're good. Do I need to believe that there's something supernatural about this, that there's this wave of light just going to come and cure me? Well, maybe not. Okay, the number of assumptions. This is where a lot of what we call weird theories or wild theories fall down. Okay, because we have to assume some things that are brand new to us. Okay, conservatism. This is what fits with our existing knowledge. We don't have to revise our background information. We don't have to throw out some things that we really thought were true in order to believe that germ theory is correct in its assumptions, right? And again, wild theories, weird theories, supernatural theories, that kind of stuff tends to lose in these back two pieces. These 5 pieces, okay, so that's how we know the best theory is the eligible theory, internally and externally consistent, that meets the criteria of adequacy better than any of its competitors. Now, sometimes there's going to be a particular one of these that is the tipping point. Okay, most of the time that's testability. Sometimes it's one of the others. Simplicity, conservatism comes up a lot. These two, fruitfulness and scope, they tend to be very closely smushed together. New predictions and diverse phenomenon tend to kind of flux back and forth with most of us. And there's a list and explanations at the bottom of 371. And then the book goes through each of these criteria one by one and gives you some examples. Okay, scope and best explanations and all of that. And then conservatism, of course. So when we get down to conservatism, I want you to look at the bottom of page 380. Accepting beliefs that fly in the face of our knowledge, background information, has several risks. One is the chances of the new belief being true are not good because it has no evidence in its favor, while our well-established beliefs have plenty of evidence on their side. The conflict of beliefs undermines our knowledge because we cannot know something that is in doubt, and the conflict would be a cause for doubt. The conflict of beliefs lessens our understanding because new beliefs cannot be plausibly integrated into our other beliefs. And so the more conservative a theory is, the more plausible it is. Okay? Doesn't mean that this is the only thing you have to look at, but if it really fails here, we're going to have a long, hard talk with ourselves about what else we have to believe and not believe. Okay? Now, we know there is no strict formula for applying this evaluation. Okay? It's going to be a little different based on what we're trying to establish and what we're trying to explain. Okay. Despite the lack of formula, the process is far from subjective or arbitrary. Okay. It's not deductive, right? It's inductive. And so it's going to be more like trying to diagnose an illness. I don't know if you've ever watched the show House. The doctor's name is Dr. House, and he's very crabby. But anyway, their whole show is devoted to trying to figure out what's wrong with this patient. And usually it's a patient that has seen multiple doctors and comes in crisis, and he's sort of like the Sherlock Holmes of medicine. He figures out things that people have missed or things that people have misidentified, and he finds the actual root cause of whatever's wrong with this patient. Okay, but it's also sort of like this idea of assessing theories. It's like making a judicial decision. There are lots of things that go into that and how that kind of riffs on each other. Or, for me, creating an essay. Just because there's no, you have to say these particular words in this particular order to get an A on this essay. It's not how it works. But there are criteria, there are rubrics that give me a subjective end to that. Okay. The last part of this section is on what he calls the test formula. I'm not all that happy about it being called the test formula. But anyway, what we're going to do is, if we're starting from the beginning, okay, and we've got this weird thing to figure out, maybe we've got a weird theory about it. You're going to state the theory and check for consistency. Okay, that's the first thing. You have to make it eligible, right? Then you have to assess the evidence. Do you have supporting evidence for this particular theory? If you don't have any evidence, oh, this is what I think. Why do you think that? Okay, you have to have something to back you up. You always have to have support. Then scrutinize, look carefully at alternative theories. If there are no alternative theories, then you don't have a theory, you have a rule. Okay. Test the eligible theories, the ones that have gotten through that far, with the COA. Criteria of adequacy, testability, fruitfulness, scope, simplicity, conservatism. See who wins. Okay. Now, the book walks through all of these nice little pieces, starting on page 385, and walks you through step by step how to do it. And then there are two very in-depth explanations / examples. TWA Flight 800. I remember this, 1996. It took off from JFK. I think it was JFK. Anyway, it took off. Something happened with the engines, and it crashed into the Atlantic, and everybody on board died. So, you know, there's that. There are all kinds of possibilities here, and he goes through some very interesting one. And then An Amazing Cure About Homeopathy on page 391. And what I really want you to look at here is on page 392. When we look at 2 different or even 3 different possibilities, when your question asks you on your homework or on a test to, based on what you know, your background information, and the criteria of adequacy, gauge these 3 theories and tell me which one's the best. I want you to make the chart. Okay? Make the chart, make the chart, make the chart. Criteria, these 5. Is homeopathy testable? Yes. Is it fruitful? Well, no. Scope? No. Is it simple? No. Is it conservative? No. Okay, so placebo gets 4 yeses and a no, so it wins. Okay? Now, sometimes your answers will be yeses all the way down. How do you tell? Well, if all 3 are testable, test them. That's where you're going to tell which one's which. Okay? So, be careful, be careful, be careful. And then we have the last of the pieces there. This is one of the things that we use unconsciously all the time. Inference to the best explanation. And we tend to use it and then weed things out, and then we have a better idea of what's going on. Very similar, scientific community, medical community, anybody who does any kind of research is looking for the best explanation for X. And so this is how we find it, and this is how we weed out the ones that aren't doing such a good job. So I hope that helps with your understanding of Chapter 10. And if you have questions, you know how to get a hold of me. You have my email. Bye.